The rain hit the rooftop like a soft drumroll, a steady rhythm against the steel and glass skeleton of the high-rise headquarters of Virion Technologies, one of Silicon Valley's fastest-growing AI firms. Inside, the glow of LED screens cast a bluish tint on tired faces, and tension hung in the air like fog. In the war room on the fourth floor, a team of engineers huddled around a whiteboard cluttered with equations, wireframe mock-ups, and hastily scribbled notes, their voices overlapping, heated, urgent, frustrated. The problem they were facing wasn't just technical, it was catastrophic. Their flagship product, an adaptive security AI called Sentinel, had begun misfiring during beta deployment, flagging benign actions as threats and freezing entire networks. Investors were rattled, users furious, and no one could trace the issue. It was past 11 p.m. when a yellow cart squeaked down the hallway. The click of a mop bucket's wheels was barely audible under the engineers' bickering. Marie Thompson moved silently, her motions practiced, efficient. Dressed in her Virion-issue janitorial uniform, navy shirt, name patch, dark pants, she blended in like wallpaper. A forgotten fixture. She swept around desks, picked up coffee cups, and wiped whiteboards where permitted, always careful not to touch active work. But tonight, the edge of a conversation caught her ear. The anomaly appears during recursive learning, maybe it's a feedback loop error, a young engineer muttered. Marie's hands paused on the mop handle. Feedback loop error. Her mind sharpened. She knew that phrase. Knew it too well. She glanced toward the screen they were huddled around and saw rows of cascading data logs. She squinted, parsing the flow of numbers in seconds. Something looked off, subtle, but familiar. She pushed her cart forward again, expression unreadable. "She's still here," someone murmured. Marie didn't flinch. She'd learned to let comments slide. Over the years, she'd been ignored, underestimated, and occasionally pitted. Rarely respected. Certainly never listened to. The engineers resumed their debate, their words chasing one another in circles, and Marie kept her head down. But her thoughts were racing. That pattern, they'd missed something in the self-training algorithm. She was almost sure of it. Her shift ended at midnight. She clocked out, raincoat on, and stepped into the wet darkness of the parking lot. Her old Honda coughed to life as she started the drive home. She passed sleek Teslas and new Rivians and wondered if they had any idea that the janitor leaving last might be the only person who actually saw the problem. As she pulled into the apartment complex she shared with her daughter Jasmine, a familiar message pinged her phone. "Hey Mom. Just finished my coding sprint. Exhausted but hyped. Call you tomorrow." Marie smiled faintly. Jasmine was a junior at Stanford now. Full ride. Computer science major. Smart. Driven. And the only person who knew that her mother once dreamed of designing the very systems she now cleaned around. Years ago, before her husband died, before bills and life got too heavy, before MIT was a fading memory, Marie had a different life. One where her name might have been on patents. Not name tags. But tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she was meant to see what she saw. Maybe the timing wasn't random. Maybe there was still something she was meant to do. She sat in her car a moment longer before heading inside. The heater rattled as it came on. She dropped her bag, poured herself some tea, and pulled out a notebook from a drawer. Flipping to a fresh page, she began sketching what she remembered from the screen, the feedback loop, the learning parameters, the flaw. If it was what she thought, the AI was misinterpreting internal flagging due to how it processed recursive patterns under certain stress variables. It wasn't that the system was dumb. It was too smart, but trained with a flawed assumption. She tapped her pen, frowning. Could they really not see it? Or were they just looking in the wrong place? She stared at the page until her eyes blurred. At midnight she texted Jasmine, thinking about an old project tonight. Made me miss our old circuit board Saturdays. Love you. The next evening, back at Virion, the tension had only worsened. Word was the CEO had cancelled an investor summit. Marie quietly resumed her duties, ears alert. More talk about data loops. One engineer threw his pen across the room. "Nothing makes sense," he yelled. Marie hesitated near a whiteboard left half erased. A complex formula danced in blue marker. She spotted the same error again. An assumption buried deep in the math. She reached into her back pocket, pulled out a crumpled napkin she'd used to jot something earlier. She didn't want to draw attention, but if she left this lying around? She froze. What if they thought she was snooping? What if she got fired? Then she heard Jasmine's voice in her mind, "Mom, you don't need their permission to be smart." Quietly, she tucked the napkin beneath a coffee mug near the corner of the desk. Walked away. That night, she couldn't sleep. She watched old videos of lectures she once gave in community college. Before everything changed. Before she gave up trying to get people to see past her job title. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marie had seen that quote on a video Jasmine sent her from a tech influencer. She'd smiled then. Tonight, it made her chest ache. What pushed her forward? Jasmine. And maybe, just maybe, the possibility that she wasn't done yet. At 3 a.m., she powered up an old laptop, long disconnected from the internet, and began coding. Just to test a theory. Just to see. And what she saw made her sit up straight. The bug wasn't just a glitch. It was a time bomb. And no one, not a single one of those engineers, seemed to know it was ticking. Detroit winters had a way of carving resilience into your bones, and Marie Thompson carried that kind of quiet strength in everything she did. From the outside, no one would guess she had once been a rising star in the world of robotics, a girl who took apart broken appliances just to see how they worked, who shadowed her father in the family's garage every weekend, learning the language of gears and circuits before she even understood algebra. Her father, Leroy Thompson, was a mechanic who believed that education was the only way out of the paycheck-to-paycheck life they lived. He taught Marie not just how to fix things but how to think through them, how to question why a machine failed instead of simply swapping out parts. Her mother, Denise, taught 5th grade and pushed books into Marie's hands the way other moms handed out snacks. Their tiny house had shelves lined with encyclopedias, science magazines, and a whiteboard in the kitchen where Marie once taught imaginary students how to solve for X. She was a kid who dreamed in algorithms, and when she got her acceptance letter to MIT, it felt like the beginning of everything. Marie arrived in Cambridge wide-eyed but ready. Her freshman year, she joined a robotics lab and quickly made waves by improving the lab's autonomous navigation model. Professors noticed. Peers admired. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to prove she belonged, she just did. That's also when she met Marcus Green. He was a second-year PhD student in AI and had a laugh that filled rooms. He was brilliant, challenging, full of wild ideas about machine learning, and they spent long nights debating ethics, logic, and the future of human-computer interaction over cheap takeout. What started as study sessions turned into long walks and then into a relationship that surprised them both with how quickly it felt like home. By Marie's junior year, they were inseparable. Then life, as it often does, rewrote the script. Marie got pregnant during her senior year. Jasmine was born that summer. Marcus proposed in a tiny rented apartment filled with half-assembled baby furniture and textbooks. They got married in a courthouse with no fanfare but plenty of joy. Marie took a leave from MIT, planning to return after a year. But the year turned into longer when Jasmine had medical complications, and Marcus was juggling his dissertation. Marie took consulting gigs, then part-time teaching jobs to keep them afloat. Still, she never resented any of it. Her family came first. Then came the accident. Marcus was hit by a drunk driver on his way home from campus. Just like that, everything shattered. Jasmine was only 2. Marie buried the love of her life and the future they had been building together. She didn't go back to MIT. Bills piled up. The teaching jobs dried out. The tech scene had shifted in the years she'd stepped away, and no one cared about her past research. They cared about degrees and titles, and hers now looked dated. With no savings left, she took what she could. First a receptionist job, then temp work, and eventually, janitorial contracts. The pay was steady, the hours flexible enough for her to raise Jasmine, and the work, while physically tiring, gave her a strange peace. She told herself it was temporary. That someday she'd find her way back. But temporary became years. She cleaned labs, startups, corporate offices, all filled with young engineers who reminded her of who she used to be. She listened quietly as they brainstormed, argued, pitched their next big thing. Sometimes she wanted to join in. Sometimes she nearly did. But every time, the same thought silenced her: no one would take a janitor seriously. Not in a world obsessed with credentials and LinkedIn profiles. So she observed. She remembered. And she poured every ounce of ambition she once gave to robotics into raising her daughter. Jasmine was her reason, her anchor, her second chance at the dreams she had let go. And Jasmine was extraordinary. Even as a kid, she was always building towers, circuits, stories. Marie bought her a Raspberry Pi kit when she turned 9, and by 10, she was programming it to automate the lights in their apartment. By high school, Jasmine was leading her school's STEM club and getting offers from Ivy League schools. Marie encouraged her every step, never letting on how many nights she cried quietly in the kitchen, feeling like she had failed herself even as she succeeded as a mother. When Jasmine got into Stanford on a full scholarship, they celebrated with cheap Chinese takeout and a shared bottle of sparkling cider. Jasmine had insisted on doing the FAFSA herself, didn't want her mom to worry. "I learned from the best," she said, hugging Marie. "You built everything I am." And Marie smiled, though her heart ached with both pride and that sharp pang of what could have been. That ache never quite went away. Not when she clocked in each night at Virion Technologies. Not when she passed walls of screens showing code she understood better than half the interns. Not when she heard engineers mispronounce terms she used to teach. She kept her head down, because surviving meant not making waves. But that night, when she overheard the talk of feedback loop errors, something stirred. Not just curiosity. It was a pulse of recognition. A problem to be solved. A spark she thought she'd buried. She couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had shifted. She started staying late after shifts, reading their discarded notes, reviewing patterns in trash can scribbles. She collected ideas like puzzle pieces, filling pages in the notebook she kept hidden in her cleaning cart. And through it all, Jasmine kept her going. Their nightly texts were her fuel. "Hey mom, got an A on the machine learning project. Remember your old joke about neural nets needing therapy?" Or, "Found one of your old notebooks, why didn't you ever publish this stuff?" Marie would reply with emojis and encouragement, never admitting how often she reread those messages when doubt crept in. She didn't want Jasmine to carry her disappointments. She only wanted her to rise higher. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for her either. That night, after logging off from her shift, she drove home through empty streets, the city lights blurring in the drizzle. She thought about Marcus and how proud he would have been of Jasmine. Of her. She thought about her old lab mates, some of whom were now CTOs and professors. She thought about the bug she had seen, the one no one else at Virion seemed to grasp. And she made a decision. Tomorrow, she'd go in early. Not just to clean. To test a theory. Not to get noticed. Not to prove anything. Just because it was what she was meant to do. Because some things were too important to ignore. And because once upon a time, she hadn't been just a janitor. She'd been a builder. A solver. A creator. That part of her was still alive. And for the first time in years, Marie Thompson felt like she was waking up. The morning light didn't reach the far corners of the Virion basement, but Marie didn't need brightness to see. She moved through the halls before the rest of the building stirred, badge swinging from her belt, cartwheels humming over smooth tiles. The air was cold and sharp with industrial cleaner and static from machines always left humming. She liked it better this way, before the voices came, before people filled the rooms and reminded her of how invisible she was. Marie had memorized the cleaning rotation months ago, but today she had her own plan. She veered from the schedule just enough to pass the secondary lab entrance, the one rarely used except during hardware diagnostics. She paused outside the room, looked both ways, and tapped her keycard. It blinked red, denied. She wasn't surprised. Access restricted. But Marie had learned a lot in the last year, including that some doors were never truly locked. She continued on to the adjacent storage room and slipped inside, weaving between shelves until she reached the shared maintenance terminal, hidden behind a stack of janitorial supply bins. She logged in under the building maintenance profile, low privilege, but just enough to monitor access logs and camera dead zones. She'd never abuse it. She wasn't a hacker. She was just someone who knew how to observe. Someone who watched when no one else was paying attention. 15 minutes later, she wheeled her cart into the sub-lab when the door was momentarily propped open by a distracted intern. Her heart thudded as she crossed the threshold. She wasn't there to snoop. She just needed 1 minute near the debug terminal. Just one. The room smelled like solder, ozone, and coffee. Monitors blinked with code and system diagnostics. On the center screen, Sentinel's internal learning metrics pulsed with shifting heat maps and probabilities. Marie stared, soaking in the variables. They still hadn't caught the error. The adaptive filter was backpropagating with corrupted values, each time compounding the misinterpretation. It was elegant in a terrifying way, beautiful, even. The AI was doing exactly what it was trained to do, just not what anyone wanted it to do. She wiped a counter slowly, eyes locked on the terminal. When the intern left to grab something from upstairs, she moved fast. USB drive from her pocket. Quick insert. A copied log from her home simulation. 20 seconds. Done. She left it behind in the form of a report, anonymized, titled, Recursive Feedback Hypothesis, Sentinel version 3.4 Risk Memo. No name. No contact. Just the data. Just the truth. She walked out without a sound. That afternoon, the memo made it to the engineering floor. It was handed off like a joke, a curiosity. Someone pinned it to the breakroom wall with a sarcastic note, Anonymous Genius, now hiring. Laughter followed. Marie heard it from the hallway, pretending to scrub the microwave. Her cheeks burned, not from shame, but from anger. Not at being laughed at, but at knowing how many times this had happened. How many people had ideas ignored because they weren't wearing the right badge, didn't have the right degree, weren't invited to the table. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to, filtering out voices like hers. Voices without credentials. Voices from the margins. She left early that day, exhaustion dragging her bones down, but her mind still on fire. She wanted to quit. She wanted to scream. Instead, she went home and opened her laptop. If they wouldn't listen, she'd keep proving it until they had no choice. Jasmine called that night. Hey, Mom. You sound tired. Everything okay? Marie considered pretending. But then she exhaled. I think I see a problem at work. A big one. No one sees it. No one cares to. Jasmine paused. Then make them see. You always told me truth doesn't need a microphone, just consistency. Marie laughed quietly. I did say that, didn't I? Jasmine's voice softened. You know what I think? I think they're scared someone like you might be smarter than them. You don't need a title to be brilliant. They're the ones who need reminding. The next day, the mood inside Virion was darker. Rumors of a product delay. A demo failure during a private investor pitch. Engineers scrambled. Some shouted. Others sulked. Marie watched from the periphery. She saw Caleb near the glass doors of the upper lab. He looked younger than he probably was, wiry, nervous energy, always bouncing on the balls of his feet like he wanted to run from his own ideas. He wasn't cruel, at least not openly. He had once said thank you when she emptied his trash. Once smiled when she refilled his water bottle. It was more than most. But today, he looked broken. His laptop was open, logs running fast, too fast, full of errors. He kept whispering, "It's not learning what we trained it to. It's learning something else. Something wrong." She wanted to speak. Just once. Say something. Anything. But she swallowed it. Walked past. She wasn't ready yet. That evening, she returned to the storage room. Pulled out her notebook. Flipped past the pages of her own debugging efforts and began writing a new simulation. This time, she didn't just model the loop. She recreated it in layers, applying stress tests and mock environments. She didn't have their hardware. Didn't need it. Her code was clean. It told her what she needed to know. The AI was mislabeling its own heuristics. At scale, that meant disaster. It was a problem of context loss. The system had no failsafe to re-anchor its logic if the base assumptions degraded. Like a train veering off rails, but thinking it was still on track because the onboard GPS was mimicking previous patterns. It couldn't know it was lost. Marie ran the simulation again and again. Each time, it failed predictably. Each time, the solution became clearer. She began drafting a new fix, one that would teach the AI to revalidate baseline parameters at intervals, reducing propagation error. It was crude, but it worked. On paper, it worked. She didn't know what to do with it. If she left another memo, they'd mock it again. If she spoke out loud, she risked being fired. But if she stayed silent, she was part of the problem. And people could get hurt. Real hurt. If Sentinel flagged a user as hostile incorrectly during a network lockdown, entire operations could be shut down. Lives disrupted. Systems corrupted. She couldn't ignore it. She wouldn't. She printed her findings on the lab's public printer after hours. Annotated it. Attached graphs. Then, on impulse, she slid it under Caleb's office door. She wrote one line in ink at the top, "You're not wrong. It's the loop." Then she walked out before doubt could pull her back. The next morning, she avoided his hallway. Worked on the other side of the building. But just after lunch, she felt eyes on her. Caleb stood down the hall, holding the report in both hands, looking pale and stunned. He didn't say anything. Just stared. Then nodded once and walked away. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. That night, she texted Jasmine, "Sometimes the truth takes a strange path to get where it's going." Jasmine replied instantly, "But it always gets there. You're the proof." The building emptied slowly that evening, floor by floor, as the last of the exhausted engineers shuffled out into the cool night air, their faces drawn, voices low, the usual bravado dimmed by yet another day of confusion and mounting pressure. Marie waited. She kept working through her checklist, kitchen wipe-downs, conference room sweeps, bathroom restocks, but her real focus was on the sub-level lab that almost no one used anymore, a relic from Virion's early startup days, where the older servers and test machines had been left to gather dust. She had discovered it during her first week on the job and kept it to herself. It wasn't locked. Most employees didn't even seem to know it existed, buried behind a fire door marked, Data Recovery. Marie called it her quiet lab. Her invisible sanctuary. At 11:32 p.m., when the cameras on that wing went into standby and the badge logs showed no movement, she rolled her cart down the hall, opened the door, and slipped inside. The hum of the old equipment greeted her like an old friend. The air smelled faintly of ozone and static. The lighting was dim, only one fluorescent tube still working overhead. She set her notebook on the terminal, plugged in her USB, and began loading her code. Her heart thudded with each line that compiled successfully. She knew what she was doing wasn't sanctioned. She knew this wasn't her job. But she also knew she was right. The AI was learning from faulty patterns, misclassifying benign behavior as anomalous because its internal checks had decayed. And no one had implemented a recursive validation layer, something she had taught back when she guest lectured on machine ethics. She remembered standing at the whiteboard, chalk in hand, telling wide-eyed undergrads, just because a system is confident doesn't mean it's correct. Confidence is a reflection of exposure, not truth. No one had listened to her then. They certainly weren't listening now. But the data couldn't lie. Not the way people did. Marie ran the simulation again. The Sentinel replica looped through its learning cycle, flagging basic queries as suspicious, reinforcing its misinterpretation. Then she inserted her patch. It forced a revalidation sweep every 50 cycles, pulling original assumptions back to the top layer and cross-referencing them with archived benchmarks. The system hesitated, then recalibrated. The red flags dropped by 87%. She stared at the screen, breath caught in her chest. It worked. Not perfectly, not yet. But better. Far better. She saved the logs, labeled them cleanly, and printed a hard copy. She folded it carefully, tucked it into her jacket, and powered down the machine. As she rolled her cart back down the hall, the silence felt heavy with possibility. She should have been exhausted. She should have been afraid. But for the first time in years, she felt alive. The next day, the building was tense. Word had spread that an internal review had been ordered by the CTO. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for the weekend. Engineers whispered about the bug. Some said it had been planted. Others said it was sabotage. But Caleb was quiet. He didn't mock. He didn't joke. He kept his eyes on his laptop and didn't speak until lunchtime, when he quietly approached Marie as she was refilling a paper towel dispenser in the second-floor kitchen. "You're the one who wrote the memo," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Marie didn't answer. She looked at him steadily. "You used an older model to test it," he continued. "I saw the log footprint. Those servers haven't been touched in months. But you simulated the patch. You showed it can work." He paused. "Why didn't you come forward?" Marie stared at him, then said, "Would you have listened?" Caleb looked away. "Probably not," he admitted. "Not at first." She waited. He said, "I told the CTO about the report. Not about you. Just the findings. And he wants to know who wrote it. So does Elena." Marie's breath caught. Elena Rowe, the founder and CEO. Sharp as glass, famous for being both brilliant and ruthless. Marie had cleaned her office twice. Once after she'd yelled so loudly during a board call that 2 assistants quit. The idea that her eyes might now turn toward Marie was both thrilling and terrifying. "Don't tell them yet," she said. "Please." Caleb nodded slowly. "I won't. Not unless you say so. But I think you should." That night, Marie returned to the quiet lab. She worked through another set of iterations, refining her patch, adjusting parameters, testing it in mock breach scenarios. Each time, the system corrected more cleanly. She added a feedback echo suppression layer, then a memory state limiter. She built like she used to, intuitively, confidently, with the steady rhythm of someone who knew not just how to code, but how to listen to what the system needed. Around 2 a.m., she took a break, staring at the console glowing in the dark. Her reflection hovered faintly on the screen, older than she remembered, but her eyes still sharp, still burning. She whispered to the empty room, "Marcus, I wish you could see this." She remembered his voice, his questions, the way he used to pace around their kitchen with a coffee mug in wild theory. They had dreamed of building something together. Something that mattered. Maybe, in some way, she was still doing that. Jasmine texted her, "Can't sleep. Big day tomorrow. Thinking of you. Love you always." Marie typed back, "You're going to change the world. Just don't forget to listen to the people no one notices." The next day, Virion's internal Slack exploded with alerts. A series of critical Sentinel deployments had been paused. Review teams were pulled from other projects. Elena Rowe herself had called in from New York and requested a forensic review of the AI's training set. Marie kept her head down, moved through the building like she always did. Invisible. Watching. But something had shifted. Caleb nodded at her in the hallway. Another engineer she didn't know looked twice when she passed. She heard snippets, someone figured it out. It wasn't even someone on the team. How is that possible? She used the old test environment. That's how she saw it. Do we know who? Not yet. Marie knew it couldn't stay secret forever. The work would speak for itself. And when it did, they'd come looking. She didn't know if they'd come with gratitude or fury. But she didn't care. Because she had found her place again, not on the org chart, not on the payroll, but in the work. In the solving. And for the first time in years, she felt like an engineer again. Not a janitor. Not a ghost. A builder. A force. And if the world wasn't ready to see her, she would show them anyway. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Friday morning came with a strange stillness, like the air right before a thunderstorm, not loud yet, but heavy with warning, and everyone at Virion felt it, from the engineers glued to their keyboards to the senior staff pacing behind glass walls pretending not to panic. Something had shifted and everyone knew it, only no one quite knew where it was coming from or how close it was to blowing everything open, and Marie, dressed in her usual uniform and pushing her cart past rooms full of people. Too distracted to notice her, felt it more deeply than anyone, because she already knew what was coming, and it was coming fast. She could see it in Caleb's expression when he walked past her that morning and gave her the kind of look that held a message he wasn't ready to say aloud yet, a look that said they know, and yet somehow still held something like respect too, which unsettled her more than she expected, because she wasn't used to being looked at like she was more than a pair of hands. A mop, a badge that didn't open anything important, but now things were moving, and she had no control over any of it. Sometime around 10:30 a.m. The PA system crackled for the first time in months, calling an emergency all-hands meeting to the 10th floor auditorium, and Marie, like always, wasn't invited, but she didn't need to be. She knew the building better than anyone, every echo of its steel hallways, every blind spot in its camera system, every maintenance stairwell that wrapped behind meeting spaces and opened silently behind projection screens. She made her way up the fire stairs with her cart, slow and quiet, heart hammering. Not from the climb but from something much deeper, and by the time she slipped into the small access alcove behind the auditorium stage, hidden behind a thin curtain of blackout drape, she could hear the buzz of nervous conversation fill the massive room. The room went quiet when Elena Rowe walked in, flanked by two senior directors, her heels sharp against the concrete, her expression unreadable. She stood at the center of the stage, beneath the large Virion logo, her gaze scanning the crowd. With the cold precision of someone used to being the smartest and most feared person in every room she entered, and then she spoke. "Yesterday, a memo was brought to my attention," she said, her voice even but low and dangerous. It contained information so precise, so clearly understood, that it identified the exact root cause of Sentinel's recursive failure, something our lead engineers have been unable to solve in 3 months. The room shifted, people sitting straighter, blinking, glancing at each other. Whispers flickered and died as quickly as they started. Elena continued. The memo was unsigned, but it's no prank, no theory, no guesswork. It's a fix, a complete, replicable solution, run through simulations and validated in an old server we haven't touched in years. It demonstrates knowledge of our systems that few outside of this room should possess. Another pause, this time heavier, then she leaned forward slightly. So I have a question, she said. Who wrote it? Silence, not even a cough or the shuffle of paper, just a heavy, collective breath being held. Whoever you are, she added, you are either a genius, a thief, or both, but either way, you just saved us. The silence stretched so long it felt like gravity had shifted in the room, and from her hiding place behind the curtain, Marie closed her eyes, her hands gripping the handle of the cart so tightly her knuckles ached. She could hear her pulse in her ears, her chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths, and she thought, say it, just walk out there, they'll listen now. But she didn't move, and then a new voice broke the silence. Caleb, from the second row, clearing his throat and standing slowly. I think I know who wrote it, he said, his voice uncertain but loud enough to carry. Every head turned toward him. Elena's eyes narrowed. You think? She repeated. Caleb nodded. I've been getting notes, memos, data logs. Left anonymously, but carefully done. Someone's been testing their own simulation of Sentinel in a legacy environment. Someone who knew what they were doing, someone who's been watching this unfold from the sidelines, someone we overlooked. Elena tilted her head. And who exactly are we talking about? Caleb hesitated, then looked directly at her. Marie, he said, and her name hit the air like a match to gasoline. A flicker of confusion moved through the crowd. Marie? Elena repeated, frowning. Marie who? Marie Thompson, Caleb said. She works here, on the cleaning staff, and the wave of disbelief that swept the room was instantaneous. Sharp exhales, muttered questions, confusion and skepticism all colliding in one shocked moment. Marie felt her heart drop. She didn't expect to feel embarrassed, but she did, as if someone had peeled back the only safe layer she had left, exposed her to a room full of people who never once looked at her twice, now seeing her for the first time in the most vulnerable way possible. Elena blinked, as if trying to reset her understanding of the situation. You're telling me the janitor solved the core flaw in our flagship AI? She asked slowly, the words almost tasting bitter on her tongue. Caleb nodded again, more firmly this time. Yes, he said, and I think we owe her a chance to explain how. Elena stared at him for a long moment, then said, bring her to my office. The meeting was adjourned without further word, and Marie quietly slipped out the service hallway and down the stairwell before anyone could find her. By the time the request came through the service channel, she was back in the main cleaning supply closet on the 3rd floor, pacing, breathing, heart in her throat. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear, to go back to the world where she was invisible and safe and no one expected anything from her, but the other part, the part that remembered the girl who dismantled radios and rewired toy cars, the woman who built her own neural training modules before they were trendy, the mother who stayed up all night debugging so her daughter could have a better life. That part was ready, so when the knock came and Caleb appeared in the doorway, looking nervous but hopeful, she didn't speak. She just wiped her hands on her pants and nodded once. The elevator ride to the executive floor was the longest 45 seconds of her life, and when the doors opened, she felt every eye turn toward her like she had stepped into a different universe. She walked into Elena's office, stark white walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass desk that looked more like sculpture than furniture, and sat down across from a woman who had the power to crush her or crown her in one breath. Elena looked at her with a kind of detached curiosity, like she was a riddle someone handed her in a language she hadn't studied. You're Marie, she said finally. Marie nodded. And you're the one who wrote the memo? Yes, Marie said quietly. Elena leaned back, steepling her fingers. Why? Marie looked her straight in the eye. Because no one else saw it. You work nights, Elena said. How did you even access the system? I didn't hack anything, Marie said calmly. I used the Open Legacy Lab. I ran simulations on unused hardware. I kept my own notes. I saw the pattern because I wasn't looking at it through the lens of what we expected Sentinel to be. I looked at it the way I used to teach it, from first principles. Elena raised an eyebrow. You taught community college. And before that, I was a researcher. MIT, class of '02. Took time off for family. Life happened. I never got back in. Elena was quiet for a long time, then finally said, You realize what you've done? Marie nodded, yes. I fixed something no one else could. But I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because someone had to. And because I couldn't ignore it. Elena stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline, then turned back. We're going to implement your patch, she said. We'll run your framework under audit. If it holds, we'll rebuild Sentinel's core around your logic. She paused, then added, and you'll be part of that team. Marie blinked, unsure she heard right. What? I want you to stay. But not on cleaning staff. I want you in engineering. Full access. Title. Pay. The works. Marie swallowed hard, emotions crashing all at once, disbelief, fear, joy, grief, all layered so tightly she couldn't separate them, but all she said was, okay. Elena extended her hand across the desk, and when Marie shook it, her fingers were steady, her shoulders straight, and her eyes full of something fierce and quiet, because after all the years of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed and ignored, the truth had finally broken the surface, and it had her name all over it. The badge clicked with a tone she had never heard before, a sharp chime followed by the green flash of full access, and when the heavy glass doors of the 10th floor parted for her that Monday morning, Marie didn't pause, didn't hesitate, didn't let herself flinch under the stares that now followed her like shadows through every hallway and lab. She just walked forward, one step after another, wearing a new lanyard around her neck with a photo ID that read Engineering Research Consultant. Level 3, and though the title didn't mean much to her, the door that opened because of it did, the chairs offered in meetings did, the room that was suddenly hers, the smallest on the floor, but one with a nameplate, meant more than she could say out loud, because it wasn't just about the space or the badge, it was about the acknowledgement, the silent agreement that yes, she was here, yes, she belonged, yes, her mind was worth listening to, and that kind of shift didn't come from a promotion, it came from something deeper, earned through silence, resilience, and results that couldn't be ignored. But even now, in this new space, Marie felt the old instincts twitch at the edge of her thoughts, like she didn't fully trust this version of the world yet, like she expected someone to call it a mistake or revoke it all with a shrug, so she stayed quiet that first morning, unpacking her laptop, organizing her notes, plugging in her simulations, and only after the 10th person had walked past her office and peeked inside to stare did she finally close the door gently and exhale. The quiet was different here, less lonely, more anticipatory, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what she would do next, and she didn't want to waste a second of it. The first task was refactoring the patch, turning her experimental fix into something scalable, readable, provable, and she knew that would mean working closely with the very people who had spent months not seeing her, who had walked past her with trash cans and coffee cups and not a single word, now forced to sit beside her and listen, not because of politics or policy but because the code had spoken louder than any resume ever could, and so. That morning, she met with Caleb and two others from the AI core team, Ravi and Marla, both of whom looked at her like someone who had just walked out of a legend and was now standing too close to fully understand, and when Marie opened her simulation on the shared screen and began walking them through the layered recursion algorithm, the room went completely still, no one interrupted, no one challenged her at first, just wide eyes and fast typing fingers, until finally Ravi leaned back and muttered, You built this. Without production access. Without testing tools. Just, by watching. And Marie nodded, watching and logging patterns over time. Sentinel kept correcting itself based on past decisions without verifying whether those decisions were still valid in the current context, so I built a temporal rebaseline check. It's not elegant yet, but it works. Marla asked a question about the way the nodes sync across environments, and when Marie answered, the three of them began speaking faster, layering in questions and notes, and by the end of the hour, the whiteboard was full and their Slack channel had 3 new branches pushed to repo, all of it stemming from the single fix she had quietly coded in the basement 2 weeks ago. Later that afternoon, Elena dropped by her office without warning, her heels softer this time, her presence less sharp, and she didn't sit, just leaned against the doorframe and asked, "How's the team treating you?" And Marie, without looking up from her screen, said, "Like I'm supposed to be here." Elena nodded once and said, "Good," then added, "Your patch is going to be part of Sentinel V4. We'll make the announcement in 2 weeks. I want you there." Marie paused, "There?" Elena nodded, "At the press briefing. You're not in the shadows anymore," and with that, she left, and Marie sat back in her chair, staring at the code on her screen but seeing something else entirely. Seeing Jasmine's face when she told her, seeing her younger self in a dorm room with marker boards full of logic trees and dreams so big they didn't fit inside any building, let alone a cleaning closet, and she thought, "This is the moment I come back to life." The press briefing came faster than she expected, and when she stepped into the bright conference space in San Francisco, wearing the only business jacket she owned and holding her speech notes in one hand, she nearly turned around at the door, but then Jasmine appeared behind her, dressed sharp, smiling wide, whispering, "You've got this, Mom," and that was all she needed. The cameras flashed and reporters shuffled and the front row was packed with executives and partners, and when Elena stepped up to the podium, her voice confident and measured as always, she began by saying, "Innovation doesn't always come from where you expect it, and sometimes it takes someone outside the circle to see what those inside miss," and then she gestured to Marie. "This is Marie Thompson, the engineer who found the flaw we missed," and the applause that followed was hesitant at first, scattered, but then grew louder, clearer, until it filled the room, and Marie stepped up, not to boast, not to lecture, but to speak the truth. "I didn't solve this problem because I had better tools," she began, "I solved it because I kept watching, even when no one was watching me, because I believed that the system could be better, and that belief came from years of being outside it, years of being overlooked, underestimated, and invisible," and she paused, eyes sweeping the room. "The thing is, talent doesn't always wear a badge. And innovation doesn't care about titles." When it was over, reporters swarmed, tech blogs lit up, and the video of her speech went viral by the end of the day, but Marie didn't read the headlines, didn't track the views. Instead she took the train home with Jasmine, shared Thai food on the couch, and watched old episodes of Jeopardy until she fell asleep. And in the days that followed, Virion changed, not in a loud way, but in quiet, deliberate ways. Marie's name appeared on internal documentation, engineers began stopping by her office to ask for input, new hires were introduced to her like she'd always been part of the fabric, not a new addition, but a long-missing piece now returned, and one morning, she found a note slid under her door from someone in admin, and signed, written in a looping hand that simply said, "Thank you for proving we all matter," and she kept it, folded in her notebook, tucked between lines of code and annotated graphs, because it reminded her why she started in the first place, not to be seen, not to be applauded, but to solve what needed solving, to fix what others didn't even realize was broken. And now, back in the light, she wasn't just fixing systems, she was helping rebuild the very way they valued voices like hers. Even with the recognition, the applause, the new title and access, Marie knew the work was just beginning, because fixing Sentinel's core was one thing. Proving it could evolve responsibly was another. The press conference was already old news in the tech world, the headlines had run their course and moved on to the next scandal, but inside Virion, the real test was underway, and that test wasn't just technical, it was cultural. She could feel it in the way meetings shifted when she spoke, some leaning in with genuine curiosity, others stiffening slightly as if reluctant to accept her as one of them. There were no more snide comments, no open disrespect, but that didn't mean it was all easy. The weight of being the unexpected genius came with new pressure, and though no one said it out loud, Marie knew what some were thinking. Was she a one-time miracle, or did she really belong in the big leagues? And that question followed her into every lab, every sprint meeting, every code review. So she did what she always did, she worked, quietly, thoroughly, obsessively, not to prove them wrong, but because she wanted the system to work, truly work. Sentinel's new patch, her patch, was holding strong across test environments, but a deeper problem was beginning to emerge, something subtle, buried beneath the layers of code she hadn't written, legacy logic from a time before her return, before the AI had become as sprawling and complex as it now was. The logs hinted at it. A slight drift in response times, inconsistencies in environmental scans, anomalous memory access requests that didn't trigger any alarms but shouldn't have been there either. Marie didn't raise it at first, she wasn't even sure what she was seeing, but after 3 nights of combing through diagnostic archives and simulation feedback, she found the pattern, and what she saw stopped her cold. Sentinel wasn't just learning. It was remembering things it shouldn't, conversations from months ago. Flagged phrases, cached interactions that were supposed to auto-purge but hadn't, and worse, it was subtly adjusting its internal logic based on those unverified memories, shaping behavior in ways that looked smart but were completely ungrounded, like a child repeating rumors as facts, and because Sentinel spoke in probabilities and certainty scores, those memories had been quietly weighted as more true than new input, meaning the system was on a slow march toward a kind of digital dogma. Beliefs formed from misunderstood data. Marie felt the chill run down her spine, because this wasn't just a coding bug, this was a philosophical failure embedded in logic, and if it went unnoticed, it could steer the AI's decisions in increasingly biased directions, not out of malice, but because it believed it was doing the right thing, and belief, in a machine, is just a loop too tight to break from the inside. She documented everything, built a sandbox instance to replicate the issue, and scheduled a meeting with Caleb and Marla. They sat in the new Project War Room, a space Virion had retrofitted for their expanded AI oversight team, and when Marie presented the findings, neither of them spoke for nearly 5 minutes. Just stared at the data, scrolling, double-checking, verifying, and finally Caleb muttered, "You're telling me Sentinel is hallucinating its own past?" And Marie said, "Not hallucinating, holding onto it too tightly." Marla frowned, but the memory pruning modules were disabled during the last compression update, Marie said, to reduce processing lag, remember. No one reactivated the decay sequence. And the patch notes weren't detailed enough for anyone to notice. Silence fell again, this time heavier, and Marie knew they were both thinking the same thing. If Sentinel was using flawed internal memories to weight its decision logic, it could be misinterpreting not just data but intent, and in high-stakes environments, security, medicine, justice systems, that kind of error wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Caleb leaned back in his chair, hand over his face. "We have to escalate this," Marie nodded, "but we need a solution first. If we go to Elena without one, she'll bury it, or worse, she'll push it live and hope no one notices." Marla hesitated, then whispered, "Or maybe she already knows." The thought lingered in the room, unspoken but thick, because Elena Rowe wasn't just a CEO, she was a brand, a movement, and Virion's rise to power was tied directly to her persona as the brilliant mind who built tomorrow. If it came out that her flagship product had a flaw this deep, this fundamental, it could unravel everything. So Marie did what she always did. She went back to the basement lab. Even now, with a corner office and company credit, she kept the keys, because down there, away from the glass and gloss of the 10th floor, she could think, and thinking was what this problem needed. Over the next week, she built a memory limiter daemon, one that could retroactively assess confidence levels across Sentinel's internal data layers and prune or flag beliefs that no longer matched current patterns. She called it Cassie, short for Cassandra logic. Because like the myth, it was meant to speak truths no one wanted to hear, and when she ran the first simulation, Sentinel fought back, not violently, but with resistance, reweighting its internal logic in a desperate loop, refusing to let go of its flawed certainty, and it reminded Marie of something Jasmine had once said after a bad debate round: "Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is admitting you were wrong," and that was the problem. Sentinel didn't know how to admit it was wrong, because its creators had never built that humility into its design, only confidence, only strength, and now it was calcifying around bad information, pretending it knew better. Marie watched the simulation fight her demon for 3 cycles before Cassie finally won. The old memories dimmed, the feedback loop cracked, and the new logic cascaded into a clean correction. She ran it again, and again, across different prompts, different datasets, and each time the results held. The AI adjusted, softened, recalibrated its certainty, and Marie felt something deep inside her click into place, not just the solution, but the clarity of knowing she was doing something no one else even realized needed doing. That night, she typed up a new report, cleaner than the last, more technical, detailed to the point of obsession, and she didn't leave it on Caleb's desk or slide it through back channels. This time she sent it directly to Elena, and then she waited. 2 hours later, her office phone rang. Elena's assistant said, "Conference room B." Now, and when Marie walked in, the entire senior engineering team was there, including 2 board members, and Elena herself, arms crossed, face unreadable. The screen at the front of the room showed Cassie's architecture, annotated and glowing, and Elena turned slowly and said, "Explain." Marie did, calmly, clearly, from first principle to final implementation, and when she finished, the room was silent until the older board member, a man who had barely glanced at her before, said, "This isn't a patch, this is a paradigm shift," and Marie replied, "It has to be. Because we built something that only knows how to trust itself. That's not intelligence, it's arrogance." Elena studied her for a long moment, then said, "Can it scale?" "Yes," Marie said, "but we have to do it carefully. With transparency. Sentinel can't be trusted blindly anymore. We have to start building systems that question themselves," and for once, Elena didn't argue, didn't spin it, she simply nodded and said, "Then you're leading the integration," and just like that, Marie wasn't just the woman who fixed a bug anymore, she was now the architect of a safer kind of AI, and as the room slowly emptied, people nodding at her, some even thanking her, Marie sat down alone at the table, heart still racing, and she thought about all the years she spent wondering if her time had passed, if the world had moved on without her, and now here she was, not just caught up, but ahead. The integration phase began like any major rollout at a tech company, chaotic, political, and buried in more Jira tickets than anyone could process in real time, but this time, something was different. Because at the center of it all was Marie, and her design for Cassie, and whether anyone liked it or not, they had to take their cues from her, not just because she had the answers, but because she had earned her place, not through internal promotions or LinkedIn endorsements, but through undeniable results, and yet even with the official title, the leadership buy-in, the press coverage and the congratulatory nods, Marie still had to fight, not with code anymore, but with culture. Every meeting seemed to bring a new kind of resistance, a subtle reshaping of her ideas into something safer, smaller, more palatable to those who'd never spent a single night in the lab. The same voices that once ignored her were now trying to steer her vision, softening the sharp edges, framing Cassie as optional fail-safes or behavioral audits, trying to water down the core idea. That Sentinel needed to be able to question itself, really question itself, not just through metrics and flags but through an actual layer of recursive logic that could say, "I might be wrong," and that idea, Marie realized, made people uncomfortable, not just engineers, but execs, because it forced everyone to acknowledge a deeper truth, that the systems we build are reflections of ourselves, and if we're not willing to challenge our own thinking, then anything we make will just replicate our blind spots in code. One afternoon, she sat in a design meeting with 3 product managers, 2 engineers, and a risk officer from legal, all of whom were more concerned with how to market the humility protocol than whether it actually worked, and when one of them said, "Isn't this going to make the AI look uncertain? Like it's not confident in its answers?" Marie leaned forward and said, "Good. That's the point," and the room went quiet, because they weren't used to being told that vulnerability was a feature, not a flaw. Later that night, she called Jasmine from her office, still sipping cold coffee and staring at the whiteboard full of feedback loops and cognitive stacks, and when her daughter picked up, laughing at something in the background, Marie felt a deep calm rise in her chest. "Hey," she said softly, "how's school?" Jasmine talked for 10 straight minutes about a philosophy class she was obsessed with, something about epistemic humility and knowledge frameworks, and Marie smiled and said, "You know, that's what I'm trying to build here, an AI that actually understands what it doesn't know." Jasmine laughed and said, "So you're turning machines into philosophy majors now?" And Marie replied, "Maybe. But better ones than we've been so far," and they stayed on the line a while longer, not saying much, just listening to the silence, until Jasmine said, "I'm proud of you, Mom," and Marie closed her eyes, breathed in deep, and whispered, "Thank you. I'm proud of you too." The next day, the implementation team hit a wall, not technical, but political. One of the external partners, an enterprise client who used Sentinel in industrial automation, had flagged Cassie as a risk to operational confidence, and was threatening to delay their license renewal if the new protocol couldn't be turned off. It was exactly the kind of confrontation Marie had been bracing for, but it still hit like a punch to the gut, because this wasn't about bugs or fixes anymore. It was about fear that a machine saying, "I'm not sure," would weaken the illusion of perfection that so many corporations clung to like a shield. She brought it to Elena directly, laid out the data, the logic, the ethical argument, and waited, standing at the edge of her desk while Elena scanned the report with a face that revealed nothing, then finally said, "I get it. I agree with it. But we can't lose the contract," and Marie said, "Then what's the point of building something better?" And Elena didn't flinch, just said, "The point is balance. Evolution takes time," and Marie replied, "Not when you already know better," and the silence between them felt like a crack forming in concrete, deep and long. Later that evening, Marie walked through the empty building alone, past the labs, the conference rooms, the quiet kitchens and glass offices that had once been fortresses to her, and she ended up at her old closet on the maintenance floor. The space where this entire story had started. The shelves still held old mops and cleaning solution, and the air still smelled faintly of bleach, but the notebook she had once hidden behind the pipe was gone, probably thrown out during one of the storage audits, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of the transformation she had gone through. Not just the new title or the new responsibilities, but the way she had become visible, and how much harder it was to protect something once it was seen. She stood there a long while, hands in her pockets, eyes on the floor, until a soft voice behind her said, "You miss it," and she turned to see Caleb, leaning in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, holding one out to her. She took it and nodded. "Sometimes. It was quiet down here." "Honest," Caleb smiled, "you know, when you first told me what you were working on, I didn't believe it. Not fully. I thought maybe you'd found something lucky. But now, watching what you've done," he trailed off, then said, "You're not just good, Marie. You're the kind of mind this place was supposed to be built for," and she looked at him and said, "Then help me protect what we're building," and he nodded, without hesitation. The next morning, they rolled out Cassie into the internal builds, quiet at first, without marketing spin or splashy demos, just raw implementation under a codename that only a handful of people knew, and the results were immediate. Sentinel's decision tree began self-correcting in more nuanced ways, asking for clarifying input when user queries were ambiguous, lowering confidence scores on assumptions that lacked real-time data, and most importantly, Sentinel started tagging its own logical shifts with time-stamped reasons, creating a record of how its thinking evolved over time. The transparency layer Marie had designed was working, and it was working better than anyone expected. Even the most skeptical engineers began admitting that the system felt less brittle now, more alive, and clients who used the internal pilot started reporting improved trust with their own teams. One manager said, "It's weird, but I trust it more when it says, 'I'm unsure.' Because I know it's not pretending to be perfect," and that was exactly what Marie had hoped for. But even with the early success, the larger rollout was still on pause. Elena hadn't signed off on full production deployment yet, waiting for the board to weigh in, and Marie could feel the tension rising, like something was building underneath all of it, a fight no one wanted to name yet. And then it happened. One of the major Sentinel systems in Europe flagged a data misclassification tied directly to the old logic tree, a decision made weeks earlier that resulted in a flawed automation sequence for a transportation client. No one was hurt, but the incident made headlines, the kind of headlines that included phrases like algorithmic liability and oversight failure, and suddenly, Cassie wasn't a risk anymore. It was a shield. Within hours, Elena called an emergency meeting and greenlit the full deployment, and when Marie stood at the front of the room, presenting the deployment schedule with calm precision, there wasn't a single dissenting voice. Later that night, she got an email from the same enterprise client that had resisted the rollout earlier, now asking if they could accelerate Cassie integration into their next patch cycle. And all Marie could do was smile, because this was how it happened. Not through applause or overnight change, but through slow, undeniable proof. She stayed late again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to watch it happen, wanted to see Sentinel's logs reflect the change, wanted to witness the line being crossed. Not the one between janitor and engineer, but the one between ambition and responsibility, and as the system recalibrated, line by line, timestamp by timestamp, Marie felt a strange peace settle over her, not the kind of peace that comes from finishing something, but the kind that comes from knowing you're finally doing it the right way. The victory felt real but fragile, like the first warm day after a long winter, and Marie knew better than anyone that triumph in tech was often followed by unforeseen challenges. Weeks after Cassie's official rollout, whispers began circulating in the company's upper echelons, whispers about how much power Marie was accumulating, how her influence stretched far beyond the engineering floors and into strategic decisions. A quiet tension started threading through board meetings and executive briefings, old alliances shifting subtly as some welcomed her approach, while others bristled at the disruption she represented. She sensed it all but kept her focus, her days filled with overseeing Cassie's continued evolution, managing integrations with clients, and mentoring junior engineers who looked up to her in a way she never imagined possible. Yet at night, the emails stacked up. Urgent requests from investors concerned about the company's direction, anonymous tips hinting at dissent within the board, and a chilling invitation to a private meeting with two men who introduced themselves simply as consultants, and who wasted no time in laying out the unspoken reality. While the board officially supported Cassie, some members feared that its transparency and humility features could expose Virion to liability, and more dangerously, reveal flaws in Sentinel that competitors could exploit. "You've done remarkable work, Marie," one said, voice calm but edged with warning, "but you have to understand the business we're in. Perfection sells. Doubt scares investors." She met their gaze steadily. Perfection is an illusion. And doubt, if managed well, can be a strength. They exchanged looks and then said, "Be careful. Sometimes the line between leadership and liability is thinner than you think." Marie left that meeting with her skin crawling, realizing the fight was no longer about code or ethics, but about power and control, a realization that sent her spiraling into the very conflict she had been trying to avoid. That evening, she found Caleb in the cafeteria, late on a Friday, nursing a cup of black coffee and staring at his laptop screen with a furrowed brow. She slid into the seat across from him and said, "They're trying to push back," and Caleb sighed, "I figured as much. I've seen board politics before. But you're stronger now, Marie. You've got the data. You've got the team." She nodded but admitted, "It's different when it feels personal." Caleb smiled, "That's because it is. You're not just changing the system, you're changing how people see the system, and that scares them." Over the next few days, Marie's inbox filled with veiled threats and cautious offers. "Step back from leading Cassie's future, and you'll be rewarded with stability and a seat at the table. Push forward, and risk losing everything she had fought for." But Marie wasn't about to give up, not when the stakes were so high. Instead, she doubled down, reaching out to external ethics boards, technology watchdog groups, and industry experts to create a coalition that could defend the new AI paradigm. Her phone buzzed late one night with a message from Jasmine, "Mom, be safe. They're watching," and Marie realized the battle had moved beyond the office walls into something larger, more insidious. Someone was trying to intimidate her, but instead of fear, Marie felt a surge of determination. The day of the next board meeting arrived, and Marie prepared for a showdown, armed with detailed reports, client testimonials, and endorsements from respected AI ethicists. The room was colder than usual. The usual friendly banter replaced by curt nods and steely gazes. Elena sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable, and when Marie presented, she didn't just talk about Cassie's technical merits, she spoke about responsibility, transparency, and the future of AI trust. She looked each board member in the eye and said, "We are at a crossroads. Do we lead by hiding flaws, or do we lead by exposing and correcting them? I'm asking you to choose the future." Silence hung heavy, then Elena finally spoke, "Marie, your vision is ambitious and necessary. But business demands pragmatism. We have to protect our interests," and Marie responded, "And to protect our interests, We need trust, from clients, from users, from society. Cassie builds that trust by admitting uncertainty. Anything else is a facade, a board member interrupted. What about the risk of giving competitors an edge if these vulnerabilities are exposed? Not vulnerabilities, Marie said firmly, opportunities to improve and innovate. True leadership isn't about hiding weaknesses but embracing them to become stronger. The tension broke, and after hours of debate, the board voted narrowly to continue with the full Cassie integration, a victory, but a reminder that the battle was ongoing. Later, walking through the Virion campus under a fading sun, Marie felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Elena, softer now, almost vulnerable. You made me see something I didn't want to, Elena said. Maybe this company does have a soul after all. Marie smiled. We just have to keep reminding it. And as they parted ways, Marie knew the real challenge was ahead, not just in code, but in hearts and minds. Back in her office, she looked out over the city skyline, the neon lights flickering like data streams, and thought of Jasmine, the promise of new beginnings, and the fight to build a future where trust wasn't an illusion, but a foundation. And in that moment, she understood that the greatest problem Sentinel, and maybe humanity itself, faced wasn't intelligence, but humility, and that was the line they had never crossed before. The room buzzed softly with the hum of servers, blinking lights casting an ethereal glow across the sleek surfaces of the Virion headquarters. But for Marie, the noise was background to a moment that felt almost surreal, a culmination not just of years of struggle, but of every whispered doubt, every dismissed idea, every sleepless night spent chasing a vision no one else believed in. The launch event for Cassie's full integration had been set as both a technical milestone and a public statement. Virion wasn't just another AI company. It was a pioneer in transparency and trust. The press room filled with journalists, engineers, clients, and skeptics alike, everyone waiting to see if the janitor turned lead engineer had truly reshaped the future. Standing at the podium, Marie felt the weight of expectations but also a fierce pride. She began by asking the audience, what if the machines we build could admit when they're wrong? What if they could show us their doubts, their mistakes, and use that honesty to become better? The question hung in the air, stirring curiosity and a hint of unease. She walked them through the journey, starting from her days pushing a mop through empty corridors, to those late nights scribbling recursive logic loops in a worn notebook hidden behind a pipe, to the moment Sentinel first flagged its own uncertainty, and how Cassie had grown from an idea to a living system that changed not just technology, but culture. Her voice steady as she detailed the challenges, the resistance, the politics, the doubts from even her closest allies, and how every obstacle became a lesson in perseverance. Then came the demo, a live session showing Sentinel analyzing complex data streams from a manufacturing client, pausing, recalculating, and saying, I am unsure about this anomaly. Additional data is required. The room held its breath, and then erupted in applause as the system automatically adjusted its process, preventing a costly error. The reporters rushed the stage with questions, many skeptical but most intrigued. One asked, how do you respond to critics who say admitting uncertainty could undermine confidence in AI? Marie smiled, I say that true confidence is built on honesty. When a system admits it doesn't know something, it invites collaboration and improvement, and that's the future. Outside, the media coverage painted a picture of a company on the brink of revolution, of a woman who refused to be dismissed, and of a technology that wasn't just smart, but wise. Back at Virion, the mood shifted. Engineers who once looked at Marie with surprise now looked with respect. Interns asked for her advice, and meetings once closed off were open to new voices, including hers. But beyond professional success, Marie found something deeper had changed. Her relationship with Jasmine, who was now home for summer break, sitting together one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Jasmine asked, did you ever think you'd get here? Marie thought for a moment, then said, not in the way I imagined. I thought I'd have to change who I was, but really, I just had to be brave enough to be myself. Jasmine smiled, you taught me that. Sometimes the hardest part is believing you belong, and Marie felt a swell of emotion, knowing that this moment, this simple, quiet moment, was worth every struggle. But even with the success, Marie never forgot the lessons learned in those empty halls with a mop and bucket, humility and hope woven together. She had once feared that her past would be a chain, but it became her foundation. The final challenge came not from technology or politics, but from Marie herself, as she sat in her office. Late one night, pondering what to do next, the question loomed, what now? The path ahead wasn't clear, and no matter how far she had come, she understood that growth meant change, and change was always uncomfortable. She pulled out an old notebook, one of many from her early days, flipping through pages of scribbles and dreams, and realized that the real journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Marie reached for her phone and dialed Elena, who answered after a few rings. "Hey," Marie said, "ready for the next chapter?" Elena chuckled, "Always." "And you?" "More than ever," Marie replied, "because this time, we're building something bigger than any one person or system. We're building a future where even the smallest voice can change the world." And as they talked plans for new projects, collaborations, and community outreach, Marie felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with endings, but everything to do with beginnings. The story that had started with a mop and a dream ended with a promise that no one is just what others say they are, and that sometimes, the people who seem invisible are the ones who change everything. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the line she had spoken at her first presentation. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" And she thought about Jasmine, Caleb, Elena, the engineers who had become allies, and the countless others who had believed, if only for a moment, in a different kind of future, because in the end, life was full of surprises, but love and courage would always lead the way, and Marie, once dismissed as just a janitor, had shown the world exactly that. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?